to the best of my ability, sometimes I do forget. So if there's ever a time where you don't hear me say, "Oh, I should start recording," if y'all can yell at me in chat to start recording, that's great. But usually I'll try to remember. And then they get posted to Blackboard afterwards. So for some reason you can't make it, or you just want to view something again later, all of the lectures will end up on Blackboard. Sometimes it takes a bit of time because the video has to compile and all that, so they don't get up right away necessarily, but they should be up within hopefully 24 hours. If you don't see a video up within 24 hours and you want to view it, shoot me an email because I can also forget that as well. I'm a little bit forgetful, so if there's ever something that you think should be happening or up somewhere and it's not, just let me know. So hopefully you're in 122. I don't know how you would have accidentally gotten into this class on Teams without actually being here, but just in case, do I have a, oh, 1 second. Maybe that's someone who can't get into the class. Doop-a-doop-a-doop. Oh, nope, just Teams being weird. Oh, no, but you're here, aren't you? Do-do-do-do-do. Oh, you're not here. Okay, 1 second. Need to drag someone into the class. First day is always fun. Oh, crap. 1 moment. Okay, there we go. Got her set up. Cool. Oh, also, one thing, let me actually. Sometimes when you come in, like after I've already started sharing my screen, you won't be able to see it. So if anytime at any day you come in and you can't see my screen, pretty much if I'm on the call, my screen is probably shared. So if you don't see a screen, just say in chat, hey, can you reshare your screen? Because for some reason Teams does a weird thing where sometimes if you come in way after I've shared it, it doesn't let you see it. So there's always that. But anyway, so back to what we were doing. So basic info about me, my email, ephannah@math.sc.edu. My office is technically in LeConte 300D. I'm not going to be there a lot unless there is some appointment already set up to be there. So I am perfectly fine meeting people in person. If you want to do office hours in person, you just need to let me know, at least the day before so that I can actually go into my office that day. But otherwise, I do have online office hours. It'll be on Microsoft Teams. So it's in a different team because I have multiple classes and I need to be online for all of them in one spot. So there's this code right up here for getting into that. So if you're on Microsoft Teams and you go to the Teams tab, which is where you probably would have found this class, at the very top right, it says like create or join a team, and you press that and then you'll type in that code and that'll bring you into my office hours team. So if you don't think you're going to use office hours, you don't need it. But if you're ever going to use office hours, that's where I'll be. And my official office hours are set to be Tuesday, Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and Monday, Wednesday. I didn't mean to put Friday, but it's on there, so I guess that's what I'm doing. Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 1:30 to 3:30. If those times don't work for you, I'm also available by appointment. So you just need to set up a time with me. As long as I'm not teaching, we're good. And again, if you want to meet in person, that is fine, but that needs to be set up in advance. So if you want to say, hey, can I come to your office hours tomorrow in person? Totally fine. I'll just have to drive to my office that day. Whatever floats your boat. But if it's not set up beforehand, all my office hours will just be online. Even if I'm in my office for someone, I will still be in my virtual office. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Most of this no one really cares about. Materials. So I sent out an email about this a couple weeks ago. So if you just got into the course, not a couple of weeks ago, it was like a week ago. If you just got into the course, you might not have seen it. It's also in the announcements on Blackboard. So I'm doing a bit of an experimental setup, if you will, for this class. So usually this class uses Applied Calculus by Hughes and Hallett, and they use Wiley Plus as well. We're going to follow the Hughes Hallett book. And so by any means, if you want to get a used copy or anything like that, you may do so. But there is an alternative textbook that is just as good, does pretty much the same stuff that we're going to be handling. And that's Applied Calculus by Callaway, Hoffman, and Lippmann. And that is free online. You can just find the PDF at that webpage. You can also get a print version of that. I think it's like $10. But if you're going to get a print version, I would say get the Hughes Hallett one and just get a used copy online off of Amazon or something. But there is the alternative textbook, which is open source, free for you to use. Online access. Also, so we're not going to be using Wiley. We're going to be using something called WebWork. Now, I haven't put up any information on WebWork up on Blackboard yet because I believe it was just set up for me this morning. So I need someone else to set it up for me. And then I set you guys up with it. So that will be kind of fleshed out in the next, day or so. And so as soon as I get that set up, I will spend the next class session a little bit of time going over WebWork and how that's going to work. WebWork is free. Hooray! So there's no cost on WebWork. It's free. That's kind of the experimental part of this, is that I'm testing these free options. It's going to look a lot more bare bone than a lot of the other homework systems if you're used to them, but it's a great platform. The math department already uses it for not homework necessarily, but they do use it in the Calculus 1 and 2 courses. So it's a good platform. Anything else you're going to need is essentially going to be posted to Blackboard. All of my lecture notes. I also post the filled out lecture notes. So the blank ones go up. I try to put them up a few days before we'll actually use them, so you can have time to print them out if you like. You don't have to print them out. But pretty much everything you'll need is going to be on Blackboard. In terms of a calculator, it says it's required. And while yes, we are going to do some things that will need a graphing calculator, the large portion of questions that I ask can be done by hand. It might take a little longer. And there's only a rare few that would actually require a graphing calculator. The other thing is that since this course is 100% online, sorry. Oops. More people needing to get into the team. Sorry, that might happen every once in a while today because it's the first day. So 1 second. Oh, come on. Bump. And bump. Oop. Oh, come on. right, sorry about that. Where was that? Graphing calculator. Oh, because we're online, you can use something called Desmos. It's a webpage. So Desmos.com. Desmos is essentially an online scientific graphing calculator. It's awesome. It's pretty user friendly. So if you don't have like a handheld graphing calculator, you can use Desmos. And I'll try to remember to point out how to use that. It's usually pretty easy. You know, you type in the function and you can point out the kind of points of interest, like any intercepts or maxes or mins or stuff like that. And it can even handle some of the calculus material that we'll do later on. So if you don't already have a calculator, you'll be able to use Desmos. Yes, even on quizzes and exams, I'm perfectly fine with anyone using Desmos. It's an acceptable thing for me. All right. We didn't get in yet. Hopefully they get in soon. All right, moving on. And blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to say too much about this. You're kind of expected to be here. You know, it's a math class. It kind of builds upon itself. If you don't come to math classes, things are potentially going to go bad if things start piling up and you get behind. Academic integrity, of course, I expect you to act in terms of the honor code. If there is any breach in honor code, you get a 0 for that assignment. So say you are found to cheat on your exam 1, you'll get a 0 on that exam. Students with disabilities, if you have a disability, you must register with the Office of Student Disability Services, and then they will inform me that I have to give you accommodations, which is perfectly fine. And that's okay. But if I don't have their information for you, I can't give you accommodation. So you can't just come to me and say, hey, I need extra time on assignments. If it's not officially through the student Office of Student Disability, I can't give that to you. But if you've gone through them already, everything, since this is a purely online class, there's like nothing you really have to set up with them after the fact that they know you exist and they know you need the accommodations and they've set that up for you. Because all of our quizzes and exams are going to be through Blackboard, so I'll just push through the extra time or anything like that manually. Studying, this is a class you should study for it. So late policy for homework, I do accept late homework. It just has a slight grade penalty. So if it's within 7 days from the due date, it's only going to be a 25% penalty, and after that it'll be a 50% penalty. I thought I put in extra words there. So what the penalty is it's only a penalty on the points you hadn't earned yet. So say you did half of the homework already, and then you forgot to finish the other half, and then you finish the other half, but the other half is late. The only points you'll have a penalty on is that half that you did late, okay? So essentially, if you earned 10 points already, and then there was 10 points left, you would have a 25% penalty on those 10 points that you had left, if that makes sense. It's your responsibility to inform me if any of your grades change. There's a lot of you and not many of me. So it's hard to keep track of who I've given extensions to, if their grades have changed or anything like that. So if you ever get an extension on homework and you finish it late, let me know so that I can make sure to change it in the gradebook. Makeup policy, for quizzes, you essentially have up until the next quiz to make it up or set up a makeup with me. So all of our quizzes are going to be on Wednesdays. So essentially if you have, ooh, that's wrong. That's the wrong day. I will change that and update that today. So essentially our quizzes are on Wednesday, so you have up until the next Tuesday to say, hey, I missed last week's quiz, I need to make that up. It's okay if the actual time that you make up the quiz lands after, but you need to set it up before the next quiz. Hopefully that makes sense. In terms of exams, it's mainly emergency situations. Why didn't you make your exam? And just reach out to me if you're missing an exam for some reason. We can set up a makeup, but it's not really as as understandable in terms of, oh, I slept through it. Well, maybe if I'm feeling nice that week, but you really need to make every effort to make sure you're there for exams. Makeup should really only be in kind of emergency situations. Course layout, hey, we're online. Of course, y'all can go read this later if you want to read it in any more detail. So homework, you'll essentially have weekly homework. You won't have homework this week because I'm setting up the web work. Once I have it set up, I might post like a preview thing so you guys can get used to it. It won't be an official assignment, but if I get it up in the next day or so, I might put like a little preview assignment so you guys can get used to it. But other than that, it'll be essentially on a weekly basis. I'm most likely going to make it a Monday to Monday thing. If I change that, I'll let you know. But it would essentially be that your homework goes up on a Monday and it's due the next Monday by 11:59 p.m. Okay, so you essentially have a week to do it. That kind of deal. Quizzes are on Wednesdays. Unless you have an exam. So if it's a Wednesday and you don't have an exam that week, you have a quiz. And quizzes essentially just cover the material that we've covered in that last week. Don't freak out about my quizzes. They're not meant to be something scary. They're just meant to help you gauge whether or not you're actually understanding the material enough to keep moving forward. So if you like get the quiz and you're like, yo, I don't know any of this, and you might do kind of poorly on that quiz, but it's just to let you know that that's then something you have to study a little bit more for the upcoming exam. At the end of the semester, your 2 lowest quiz grades are dropped. So yeah, also, you will have a quiz this Wednesday. Now, don't panic. It's not really going to be a super official quiz. It's going to kind of be an introductory quiz. I might ask you a couple questions about yourself, like if you prefer to be called a different name or something like that, or if your name has an interesting pronunciation. I had someone last semester, Kyra. I kept calling her Kira, but it was Kyra. So I want to try to avoid that if you guys have some different pronunciations. I know I probably won't be saying your names very often, but I definitely want to try to make sure to call you by what you would like to be called. And this quiz this Wednesday will probably be more of a diagnostic quiz kind of deal, to just give me an idea of what you guys know already. So essentially you'll take the quiz, and as long as you take it, you'll pretty much get the credit for it. So quizzes on Wednesdays. And then of course there's exams. Exams, the 3 dates for those, so they're not necessarily on a Wednesday. 2 of them are, but one of them's on a Friday. So Wednesday, February 10th, Friday, March 19th, Wednesday, April 14th. And then your final exam is April 28th, but of course I'll bring that up closer to when that actually happens. On Blackboard, I kind of tried to set it up a little bit so that some of the more pertinent information was easy to find. So the syllabus, the full syllabus, of course, up there, but then some things like the exams, the makeup policy, my office hour information are also listed out on Blackboard, so you don't actually have to go into the syllabus. This is how your grades are going to break down. You can go back and look at that later. I pretty much follow the basic grading scale. Useful websites. Blackboard, of course. Wolfram Alpha is, so on top of that, I already told you about Desmos, so that's another one. But Wolfram Alpha is another great web page for calculations. It's a bit less user-friendly, but it can do a lot more than Desmos can. Desmos can do everything we need it to do, but Wolfram Alpha is a bit more, it can do a lot more. But anyway, if you need help throughout the semester, of course, come to my office hours. There's also free tutoring from the math department. You can go to that page to look at that. If it's the same as last semester, I actually haven't checked this yet, but if it's the same as last semester, they're doing it online, of course. And it is a drop-in style, so like you don't need to set up an appointment or anything. Let me triple check. Yeah, it does seem to still be on Blackboard. Oh, this is still fall 2020. I'm going to assume they're still going to do an online format for this semester, but the web page hasn't been updated yet. But it's essentially a drop-in kind of situation. You just drop in and say, hey, I have some questions on my homework, or hey, I have some questions on whatever, and they'll answer them for you. It is kind of first come, first serve, so if you drop in and there are already a ton of people there, then it might take a little while for them to get to you. But that's an option. Student Success Center also does tutoring as well. They do group tutoring, I believe, and there's also one-on-one. And of course, there's SI sessions as well. I still don't see Zoe in here. But hopefully at some point she'll be able to talk to y'all. There's some important drop dates if you are concerned about dropping, and then here's our tentative schedule. One thing I want to point out on this is since there's kind of the 2 book options, the usual Hughes Howlett one and then the free version online, their sections don't necessarily match up. So it'll be a little different between the 2. So keep track of which one you're working with. So this one is essentially the one that is attached to Wiley. And then this one is the free online one. And I'll try to keep track. If you see on Blackboard, when I post the lecture notes, it gives you which sections in which book it is. So you can also pull them from Blackboard as well. Okay. So that's mainly all the syllabus hoopla. Any questions so far? All right. Maybe I should try to Maybe I should try to do this real quick. But I want you to see this. There we go. So I know I'm sharing my screen of Teams, which is a bit weird, but I just wanted to note a couple things in case you don't already know them. Depending on whether you're on the app or the web page, it might look a tiny bit different. I'm on the app. I think it's just nicer. But up here, there's a lot of information. I don't know if you can see the participants, but anyway, there's the conversation tab. So if you ever need to ask a question or anything, excuse me, that's where the chat is. There's this raise your hand option, which could be very useful. Because sometimes I'll try to stop every once in a while and ask for questions, but sometimes I don't know if people are trying to type as I'm waiting or not. So if you ever have a question, or especially if you want to stop me while I'm rambling, that can be really useful because that'll just pop up and tell me that someone raised their hand, and then I'll stop rambling and try to see what that's about. If you go to more actions, the little 3 dots, now this is where I don't think this option is on the web page, but it should be on the app to turn on live captions. So this will just turn them on for you, so don't worry about thinking that's going to turn it on for everybody. But if you want to turn on live captions, they're not perfect by any means, but they might be helpful if you have some hearing problems or just like to have captions. In terms of what you would need to use, I believe that's the main stuff you'd want to look at. All right. I think my screen is unshared now, or maybe not. Why isn't it letting me reshare? There we go. Boop, boop, boop. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions for the last 20 minutes of class, we'll jump into a couple notes just to get started. Again, so I do these kind of, these kind of guided note type of deals. And again, this first section definitely got up on Blackboard way later than I would usually do so in the semester because it was just starting. So I know some of you probably don't have them printed out already. And by any means, again, you don't have to print them out if you just want to try to write stuff down in your own notebook as we go. And again, these filled out notes will get onto Blackboard after each class as well. Excuse me. So one thing about this class that I should say before we start. The first chapter is a little odd because it goes through a lot of stuff very fast. And depending on where you are mathematically, Some of it might seem super easy and like super duper review. If you've taken calculus before, this first chapter is probably going to feel very review-like. If you haven't taken math in a while, it's probably going to be a good refresher. It will be a bit fast, but we do kind of go through a lot of what would be considered review for a calculus class, but this calculus class kind of runs a little different than others. And then after chapter 1, we actually get into the calculus. So things are going to be set up a little bit different if you've ever taken a calculus class before. Not that it's expected that you've taken one before. Anyway, so the first section is essentially, I call it what is a function. So if I want to define a function, what a function is, let me use purple so I can kind of tell the difference. So a function is a rule that takes certain inputs and assigns to them a definite or unique output. So another way I'll phrase that is that each input has one output. Another thing about doing notes this way, usually if this was an in-person class, I would kind of look around and see when people are done scribbling. I can't do that here, obviously. So if at any point I start going too fast, I've moved on to the next thing and you haven't written everything down yet, please feel free to raise your hand real quick and ask me to slow down, or just type in chat slow down. I usually have chat up on the side to make sure I'm catching any questions along the way. Don't feel like you have to use the raise your hand function if you can type fast enough, but that might just be good if you can raise your hand and you're a slower typer or you have something very long to type. Then I'll actually know to hold on until you've typed it. But anyway, so a function is something that has inputs and outputs, and each input only goes to one output. The set of inputs is going to be called the domain, and the set of outputs is going to be called the range. So say I want to give an example of a function that we could possibly encounter in everyday life and then determine what the input and the output could be. There are, a million answers to this question, but a couple examples, maybe I'll write down 2 of them. One example could potentially be, we say rainfall per day. Say you're watching the news and it's raining a lot in the past couple days and they're telling you how much rainfall has happened each day. Essentially, the rainfall that they give you would be your output, and the day would be the input. Because if you think about it, you can't have one day that has 2 different amounts of rainfall, unless you're talking about different years. You can't say on January 1st, there was 2 centimeters of rain and 5 centimeters of rain, if you're talking about the same area. That doesn't make any sense. So this would give us a function because each one of those inputs, the days, can only go to one output. Another example, and one that we're going to view a bit more in this class, is in terms of like distance, and you could also think velocity or acceleration, but say we talk about distance traveled by a car. Ooh. I'm also a terrible speller, so I'm just thinking right now, I don't know if traveled has 2 L's or not, but I'm going to put 1. So distance traveled by a car for a time traveled in minutes. So essentially the amount of minutes you've driven gives you the distance that you've gone. So the amount of minutes would be the input and the distance would be the output. And again, this would be a function because if you take a certain amount of minutes, you can't have driven 2 different distances. You can't say after 60 minutes, I've driven 100 miles and 50 miles. That doesn't make any sense. So since each input can only go to one output, that would be an example of a function. If I wanted to then look at something that was potentially not a function, again, there's a million answers to this question. I think I'm just going to do one this time. Something that wouldn't be a function. Let me say maybe we could take the time spent studying to the grade on an exam. So, you know, all of my students have told me how much time they spent studying, and then of course there's also the grades that they get on the exam. Well, if the time spent studying is the input, and the grade on the exam is the output, it's possible to have the same input going to two outputs, because if you think about it, you could have two students, two students get an 85 on the exam. So remember, that's the output though. But say one student studied for 2 hours and the other for 1 hour. So one of the students studied for 2 hours and got an 85 on the exam, but a different student only studied for 1 hour and got an 85 on the exam. Two different inputs, 2 hours versus 1 hour, but they went to the same exact output, the 85 on the exam. So since we have two inputs, two different inputs specifically, going to the exact same output, that's not good. Done that backwards. Done my first whoopsie doops of the day. Well, hopefully not of the day. Hopefully there's not an error every day. Sorry, give me 1 second. Why is each input can only have one output? Each input can only have one output. I'm so sorry. Back up. I hate when I make a mistake on the first day. Usually don't make mistakes. Sorry. The way I had it set up would have actually been a function because two inputs going to the same output is fine. So let me make a little note over here. Two inputs to same output is okay. So the way I had just stated it, where the inputs were the time spent studying and the outputs were the grade on the exam, I had two different times studying sent to the same exam grade. That would have been okay. Totally sorry about that. But if we switch it around, where we have the grade on the exams being the input and the time spent studying being the output, it suddenly doesn't become a function. So there are situations like this one where in one direction it would totally be a function and the other one it doesn't. So once I make the change over to the grade on the exam being the input and the time spent studying being the output, it's still the same situations. Two students get an 85 on the exam. The input is 85, but then the output for one of the students is 2 hours and the output for the other student is 1 hour. You have the exact same input going to two different outputs. That's the bad thing. Different inputs going to the same output is okay. Very sorry about that. Are there questions about that? I want to make sure that's clear before I move on, because I didn't mean to mess that up. Okay. Okay. Again, I'll try to pause every once in a while to wait for questions, but always feel free to stop me if you need to. Let me try to keep that in there a little bit. So say we have this situation here, we want to determine the input and the output of the following statement. So we have the average height in inches, which we're going to call H, of a young peach tree in South Carolina in a given year is a function of R inches of cumulative rainfall since March 1st. So I want to figure out the input and the output. One thing I really want to stress here is the phrasing of this statement is actually what's going to give us the input and the output. So we have the average height and then, a bunch of filler information, if you will, is a function of R. So the average height H is a function of R, and it's this is a function of that is really going to help us figure out which one's the input and which one's the output. So for functions, we have something called function notation, which I want to talk about really quick. So function notation, pretty much most of you have probably seen before in your life, usually given as f of x equals y, or f of whatever equals whatever, where essentially the f is the name of the function, the x is going to be your inputs. Can I spell? Inputs. And your y is going to be your outputs. Okay. Now, if I were to read that out, the way I would read this is y is a function of x. And it's actually kind of nice because if it's written like that, it kind of falls out. Y is a function of x. The y gives you the y. The is kind of tells you the equal sign. Function tells you f and then x. So since we're given that phrasing here, we're given that the average height h is a function of r, gives me that, well, let me write it out first. Let me just write down lots of information. So h is a function of r. So h equals f of r. So whenever you see that phrasing is a function of, you can essentially write it out in this function notation. Once I have it set up in this function notation, it's really easy to figure out which one's my input, which one's my output. My inputs, excuse me, is the one inside of the parentheses. So essentially our R is going to be our inputs, and our H is going to be our outputs. This is actually a really important thing that you're going to want to get very used to. You're going to want to get very used to that phrasing and being able to write it in the correct function notation. We're going to have lots of questions, especially once we get to kind of the cost, revenue, and profit function type things. We're going to have, quantity is a function of price versus price is a function of quantity. And that phrasing is going to tell us how to set up our functions. So you definitely want to be familiar with that phrasing. Okay. I'll hold on a couple seconds in case people are still writing something down. And again, please, I can't say this enough, please don't hesitate to stop me if I need to go back to something or, you weren't done writing something down. So in this next problem, we want to use the following table to fill in the blanks. So this is essentially getting us used to this function notation and being able to read a table. We're also going to be very often using tables instead of just actual functions. Well, this is a function, but yeah. We won't always have an actual equation, is the word I want, equation. Was that enough, or what did you mean? Back more. Okay, cool. Let's go back down. So say I want f of 2. So since 2 is my input, that means that that's my x value. So I'm going to go to 2 on the table, and I'm going to go down to my output from there. It's going to be 6. If I want f of 4, my input is 4, so my matching output would be 3. Now in the opposite direction, so essentially here, these last two, we actually want the input. So this is what input gives me 5. So if I look at my outputs and I find my output of 5, what input gave me that? The input was 0. And then what input gave me, what input gave me 2? I find my output of 2. What input gave me that? It was 8. Oh, one last thing. In terms of like me and stopping me or whatever. It's been a very long time since I've had to learn material like this. And I don't mean that I don't mean to say that to sound condescending or anything like that, but I just want to let you guys know that it has been a long time since I've had to learn this material. I kind of know it like the back of my hand. I know I made a mistake slightly earlier, but especially when we get to the calculus material, I've been doing it for a long time. To me, it's very easy. And again, I don't mean that in a condescending way. What I do mean about that is if I'm ever going through something too fast, especially if I'm making it sound like it's easy, I'm too awkward for my own good. So sometimes I say phrasings like, oh, and then the easy step is this. And I don't mean that if it's not easy for you, that's should make you feel bad. If there's ever a step, even if I said it was the easy step, I try to avoid that verbiage, but sometimes it spews out of my mouth. If there's ever something that I'm going through too fast or you feel like I didn't explain well enough, please, for the love of all that is good and holy, stop me and let me know. Okay, anyway. 5 more minutes. Let's try to get through this part of this question and then maybe one more, and maybe we'll wrap up a tiny bit early. So now I want to know, is this actually a function? Why or why not? So I can always give you a set of data, and it's always something called a relation, but it's not always a function. So essentially, like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Essentially, all sets of data are relations, but they're not always functions. So here, what we would specifically look for, well, remember a function has every input only going to one output. So we want to essentially look and say, do any of our inputs repeat? And they don't. So since none of the inputs repeat and they only go to one thing, this is a function. So is f a function? Yes. Each input has exactly one output. Now I want to add on to that a little bit. Say I extended this table by one more data point. And say I put another 0 there. As long as that output is still 5, that's technically okay. Like I could just list the same data set again. So, excuse me, my throat is rather dry. So it's not necessarily just looking to see if the inputs repeat. It's to look to see if the inputs go to different things. So if instead I added on that 0 again, but now it went to 10, well, now I have the input of 0 going to 2 different things. So it's not just do the inputs repeat, it's do the inputs actually go to 2 different things. So if the inputs go to 2 different things, if the same input goes to 2 different things, it's not a function. All right, let's do one more. It's super quick, and then we'll call it. So we'll also need to be very familiar with functions. That's, I meant to say graphs of functions. So if I want f of 4 on a graph, so remember essentially our inputs are always the, yeah, so essentially, let me write that down. Every function is a relation. So if it's a function, it's a relation. Not every relation. Oh, I think I misunderstood your question. Is a function. So the thing I just wrote where it had the 0 and the 10 at the top, that would have been a relation. Like absolutely any set of data I give you is a relation. So I don't care if things repeat, if they go to 2 different things, that doesn't matter in terms of a relation. It just matters in terms of a function. All right. So really quick, this one, remember your inputs are essentially your horizontal axis and your outputs are your vertical. So if I want f of 4, I go over to my input of 4, go up to the graph. Where am I at? I'm at 2. If I want to know the input that gives me 0, where is 0 in my outputs? That would get me here. What input gives me that? 2. So that's just barely starting our 1.1 notes. We've still got stuff to finish, but that was planned. So we will finish up 1.1 on Wednesday, most likely. Hopefully start 1.2 as well. Hopefully Wednesday I'll also have the information on web work. So that's a thing. So you don't have any homework or anything to worry about this week. So I'll tell you about web work as soon as I get it set up. If you have any questions about anything that we went over today, feel free to stick around for a couple of minutes. I do have a class after this, but I have a couple minutes if you have questions. Otherwise, as I mentioned, all of these completed notes and all of the videos will get up on Blackboard. And other than that, I will see you all on Wednesday, and have a good day. That's a good question. So remember, those of you who might have came in late, there is a quiz on Wednesday. It's not a really official quiz, but that's going to be through Blackboard. And I'll talk about that a bit more on Wednesday. It's essentially on Blackboard. There's an assignment tab. It'll be on there. You're welcome. Raylan, practice sheets on what? Is there something specific that you're looking at, or is there a bit more of that? Aaron, you're correct. Since there's the free version of the book, you don't need to buy the book from the bookstore. Susan, they'll be posted on Blackboard. If on Blackboard there's a course content / module little thing on the left, and they will all show up there. Now they're oh my goodness, they're going to be uploaded in the order that we complete them. So like this one is labeled functions. And the one that we will start hopefully on Wednesday is labeled linear function. So essentially they're put up in the order that we will be covering them, but they're up on Blackboard. Oh, well, I'm glad I got your name right, Raylan. I mean, I guess I could try to find some worksheets or something. But remember, we will be having the homework. That's not going to start till next week. But if you want, I can try to find some worksheets and plop them on Blackboard. For the most part, that's kind of why I have these notes being so problem-based, is because I want to make sure we have enough problems. And most of the time, there's going to be kind of these extra problems at the end, which we might not get to in class, but I'll always post the answers to. So you could also use those along the way as extra practice, because again, we most likely won't have time in class to go over them, but these extra problems would be going over some good material as well. So just so you're aware, there's that as well. But if you would like, I can try to find some extra material if you'd like me to try to put those up on Blackboard. That sounds like a great idea. If there's any specific things where you're like, hey, can I get some extra practice on this topic specifically? That'll probably be the best way to go about it.